The first attempts to manage people in this fashion, I mean, the American Civil War is really the first institutional war. It's the first war in human history where, you wouldn't know this from watching the movies, but where every unit wore the same uniform. I mean, in the French Revolution, which wasn't very much earlier, every unit wore the uniform that the wife of the commanding officer designed and had caused to be made. The Napoleonic Wars did not look at all like the artistic renderings of them. I mean, they were crazy quilts. So was the American Revolution there. But the Civil War, I'll think of this because in a way it's exciting. It's an evil kind of excitement. But the Civil War said, there's 3 million of you, and you'll all wear the same hat and the same jacket, the same pants, the same socks, the same shoes, with, minor variations in them. As soon as you can do that, when you know that one order for hats can make you quite wealthy, just a single order, and that these orders, as the heads get blown off, will continue over and over again. You have a situation ripe for political maneuvering, and you also have a motivation to think about the difficulties you're having making this managerial utopia work.
I signed up the 8600th Division in central headquarters in a courtyard,
enfolding the gnarled varicose roots of old magnolia trees. Outfitted with documentation, signatures.
What else I come with? Good intent. College, some experience. Lieutenant issues keys.
Pass out paper weapons, including lyrics to lift every voice, dismissing us into a gray dawn of predetermination.
Salutations, side bets. Mercenaries, no defined enemies. Wagon patties of casualties.
Stated objective, increase Stanford 9 scores by some percent. Scoot off the 39th pile of dirt on the
floor of the worst, and I'm being paid to fight. Deep in the jungle off Crenshaw, not teach. Where beasts are six or two-legged.
Fly by wings, real or imagined. Circulating local diseases that stick to melanin. Pass through bottle
formula at fostered groups and broken projects, family groups where most cadets live. The bell rings.
In come my cadets among snipers. First rounds of fire scratch into the surface of a desk. Mercenary
front line, sing it loud if you remember it. Lift every voice. The first bar, hum it over the sniper fire. Rings with the
harmonies of liberty. Sing it loud and point to the chalkboard while you hum about Stanford 9
test-taking strategies while you fill out referrals with your bad hand. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us.
More sniper fire. Hum from your diaphragm and draw pictures to explain the words.
Cadet ears plugged, wax, Glock, rot, soda pop, Discman, sniper fire. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Front line, sing it if you know it. Hum to the end what you don't remember. Sniper fire.
Paper balls, spitballs, broken chairs, and emergency phones, upset beakers that shatter into spears. A cadet scoots under his desk with the side of
his Nike and just leaves it. Till now we stand at last. Mercenaries, keep humming. Assign pictures since they don't read well.
More sniper fire. Tell them to have any kind of pride but gangster pride. Remind them they're victims in a war.
Six-part slave in their mother's blood. Keep us forever in the path we pray. Hum Interject words like
must, should, can, pride. Snipers look you dead in your mercenary eye and smile as they fire. Riveted
pellets sink into flesh, make backs of heads and profiles more complicated. Just before the bell rings, lest our feet stray,
our hearts drunk wine world forget. Sing to them, sing as they pile out the door. Sing!
Or at least hum.
Recall that the people being managed had come out of a libertarian tradition. Their ideal, their American dream, was to have an independent livelihood, but that certainly doesn't butter the steel manufacturer's bread at all, et cetera, et cetera. So there was so much difficulty trying to bend the American population to this new corporate economic style that the floodgates of immigration were opened for one of the few times in history. It isn't that people flocked to the United States for opportunity. They were brought to the United States and sold as they landed in wagon loads to brokers who then resold them to corporations, sometimes a long, long way from where they landed.
Okay, let's just talk about the principle. Okay, I mean, the principle, as far as I can see, goes right back to the Enlightenment. You know, like if you go back to classical Enlightenment thought, I'm now talking about Adam Smith and Jefferson and those guys. The sort of core idea is that people have the right to control their own work. Okay, that if a person, here I'll quote a standard formula back in the 18th century, leading heroes of the Enlightenment, is if a person does beautiful work under external command, meaning for wages, we may admire what he does, but we despise what he is, because he's not a free human being. Okay.
And so the Black Panther Party was, needless to say, targeted for this. Targeted so badly that ultimately we were pretty much destroyed from both within and without for a variety of reasons. But that at the end of that period, and it can't just mark it at the end of the death of Martin Luther King in '68, because we remember King, but we don't remember the dream, much less who slew the dreamer. We don't even think about what happened. Black people didn't become free in America. And why is it important even to talk about black history or black people? As King himself said, the destiny of black people is tied to the destiny of white people. You can't get around it. And you can't get over it, and you can't get under it.
That goes all the way through classical liberal thought, Enlightenment thought. I mean, Alexis de Tocqueville says, under wage labor, the art advances, the artisan declines. Now, you find this going right into the working class movements in Lowell and Lawrence. I think that's just natural. I wouldn't try to convince anybody of it. It seems to me if you think about it, yeah, why should you work on command? I mean, if you work on command, you're some kind of slave.
You left me nothing, that's all I need. You left me nothing, that's all I need. I know that emptiness is a space full of promise. You left me nothing, that's all I need. You made me lose my faith in me. You made me lose my faith in me. Then I realized one day that only I stood in my way. You left me nothing, that's all I need. You stripped away my dignity. You stripped away my dignity. I refuse to let you win. This is where self-love begins. You left me nothing, that's all I need. You fear the power that's in me. You fear the power that's in me. You tried to murder me, but I'm still here, you see. You fear the power that's in me. You left me nothing, that's all I need. You left me nothing, that's all I need. I know that emptiness is a space full of promise. You left me nothing, that's all I need.
All this long-winded stuff is leading you up to a progressive insight that increasingly was made in those drawing rooms in which the independent livelihood of small farmers and small tradesmen and craftspeople was about to be transformed into a corporate economy. And that insight was, well, the devil with trying to convince older people, we will pass legislation forcing them to yield up their children to be confined for long periods of time with total strangers who we will have a 100% influence on their hiring and on what they say. Now, if that isn't the single most radical idea in human history, I don't know what's close to it myself. And the very fact that we take these places for granted, if you reduce it to simple statements like, I want you to surrender your child for the next 12 years for the principal part of the day, 5 days a week, to a set of total strangers who you will know nothing about whatsoever. You'll be lucky if you know what they look like, or if you get 3 minutes with them in the course of a year to exchange platitudes with. Can there be a more radical idea than that in giving your kid to strangers? Would you give your television set to somebody that you couldn't check up on? Well, I can guarantee you. You're in Canada, right?
Yes, that's right.
It's worse up there than it is here, but it's bad enough here.
The Igbo used to say that they built their own gods. They would come together as a community and they would express a wish. And their wish would then be brought to a priest who would find a ritual object, and the appropriate sacrifices would be made and a shrine would be built for the god. But if the god became unruly and began to ask for human sacrifice, the Igbos would destroy the god. They would knock down the shrine and they would stop saying the god's name. This is how they came to reclaim their humanity. Every day, all of us here, we're building gods that have gone rampant. And it's time we started knocking them down and forgetting their names. It doesn't require a tremendous thing. All it requires is to recognize among us every day, the few of us that can see are surrounded by people like the ones I've told you. There are some of you in this room, amazing people who offer all of us the mirror to our own humanity. I want to end with a poem by an American poet called Lucille Clifton. The poem is called Libation, and it's for my friend Vusi, who's in the audience here somewhere. Libation, North Carolina, 1999. I offer to this ground this gin. I imagine an old man crying here out of the sight of the overseer. He pushes his tongue through a hole where his tooth would be if he were whole. It aches in that space where his tooth would be, where his land would be, his house, his wife, his son, his beautiful daughter. He wipes sorrow from his face and puts his thirsty finger to his thirsty tongue and tastes the salt. I call a name that could be his. This is for you, old man. this gin, this salty earth. Thank you.
In the book, you do talk at length about scientific racism and the development of scientific racism.
Racism has been with us for a while. In the mid to late 19th century, the scientific and medical community, as well as the political establishment, got very much involved in trying to make racism more officious and make it more, in their terms, scientific. That is, using measurement, using the appeal to numbers, which was very much a part of our intellectual society at that time. So the concept of measuring skulls, measuring all sorts of body parts, became an integral part of scientific racism in an effort to so-called prove the inferiority of people of color. Later on, around the time of World War I, IQ testing, the standardized test, then became the central vehicle of scientific racism. And those standardized tests were, in effect, said to be the proof that people of color were inferior because they, across the board, they were scoring lower. Well, of course they were going to score lower. They had not been exposed to education. How are you going to take a group of people that were enslaved for 350-odd years and simply say, well, now you're going to be equal to free people? So that whole testing movement, which I hope we'll return to a little bit later on, is an outgrowth of scientific racism, which is still with us today. The testing movement has now become thoroughly institutionalized in public education. There's not a school district in the country that does not use standardized testing. In fact, our Congress made it mandatory that every state in the union must, in some way or another, impose standardized tests. All this is an outgrowth of the movement of scientific racism. And in the final analysis, testing and the other tools that our educational establishment uses are simply another way to try to justify inequality. And every system based on economic inequality has to find ways and means of justifying why some people have more resources than others, why some people have more power than others, why some people have more freedom than others. That has to be justified, and school and testing have been ideal ways of trying to make inequality understandable. Of course, it's all a fraud, and we know it's a fraud, but it's perpetrated against us nevertheless.
Sometime around the middle of the 19th century, a fourth purpose arose, but it was outside the consciousness of ordinary citizens. And that was with the rise of fossil fuels. Remember that prior to the 19th century, for all practical purposes, your sources of energy other than human labor are wind and water and wood, and they're very, very unreliable. You know, they come and they go. And when the wood's gone, it doesn't come back for a long time. So most organized factory work was near some source of water or wind, or it relied on labor. So none of the institutional production mechanisms were very effective. They didn't dominate the life of the community. But with the development of coal and steam power, and then about a half century later, the development of oil, suddenly for the first time in human history, in the 19th century, managers economic managers had the ability to predict the future. They could work around the clock. They could make pretty accurate guesses about how many units they could produce in that time. And a need arose to concentrate people in urban centers for that purpose, to make them the assistants of coal and steam and oil. So with that understanding on the part of, let me call them society's managers, not just the rich, but people who devoted their intelligence and their attention to working out arrangements to multiply wealth. And so at that point, human beings ceased to be what they had been for all of human history, and they became pure and simply productive units, or less productive units, or unproductive units. The sentimentality that in particular the Christian religions lend to the social order, that your terrestrial achievement is inferior to your salvation, for example, or that you are your brother's keeper. I mean, we could talk about this for a week.
This was Kinté Cast number 4, an evil kind of excitement for a managerial utopia. This show depends entirely on a Canadian interview by Radio Free School of the great award-winning New York school teacher John Taylor Gatto. We, here in the Kinté space, entitled this interview John Taylor Gatto, Outing School. This is followed by the ingenious poetry of Fumilayo Bankole. She reads War from a presentation we entitle Fumilayo Bankole, L.A. River. We then move into tracks by Noam Chomsky in Noam Chomsky, Propaganda and Control of the Public Mind, and former Black Panther Elaine Brown in Elaine Brown, The Condemnation of Little B, talking about the ideals of the Enlightenment, the right for man to self-control one's labor, what slavery really means, and how the fate of blackness is intimately tied with the fate of whiteness. The next move is toward the power of nothingness, protesting in the singing voice of Cassandra Xavier in the presentation we entitle Cassandra Xavier, Nothing is All I Need. After nothingness comes the world-renowned poet Crisabani reciting Libation by Lucille Clifton in Crisabani, Break a Leg. We end this show with a few well-chosen words by Professor William H. Watkins in William H. Watkins, The White Architects of Black Education. Sounds, music sources by Bill Laswell, his Ambient Realms release from Sony Creative Software. So, yes, life is hard, and by the end of this episode of the Kinté Cast, we should have a better idea where the concrete factory is. This is Roz X at kintéspace.com.